Hello and welcome to the Literary Lair. It's our 100th episode! Yeah, I still can't believe that this little book review show of mine has finally reached 100 episodes. In the past 99 episodes, I've looked at good books, bad books, mediocre books, and downright terrible books. I've traveled to parallel universes, met alternate versions of myself that were nice, ones that wanted to kill me, ones who wanted to kill me but are nice now, had run-ins with my past and future, and saved not only this universe, but 2 other universes from extra-dimensional annihilation without asking for any sort of credit or reward, among other things. But that's not why you're all here. You're here for the review. And the book I have to review is the perfect book for me to review for my 100th. The author was quintessential for my deciding to start reviewing, and if this book never existed, I may have never decided to start this show. A book that if I didn't do it for a milestone, it would be an utter travesty. A book whose author is one of my biggest inspirations for being a reviewer.
Get on with it.
Get on with it!
Get on with it!
Yes, get on with it!
Alright. The book I'm going to review is...
Get on with it!
Fine. It's Angel Armor Just a Boy by Lewis Lovehog. I've had this book in mind for the 100th since before the 50th, and for a really specific reason. Lewis was 15 when he wrote this, and I was 15 when I started this show. This book shows me that if I put my mind to it, no matter how bad I was at it when I was 15, I can get better. This book is a symbol that shows me that I can get to be like Lewis one day, as long as I have the drive and motivation to do so, even if I wasn't that good a writer when I was 15. I mean, look at Lewis. He has 300 plus episodes and has written amazing storylines, the likes of which I can only dream of writing something that comes within the same caliber. He's come a long way since this book, and I want to pay tribute to the reviewer that inspired me to start reviewing. Anyway, I've rambled enough. Let's get straight to it. Roll theme song. sure if it's made specifically for the book, although I suspect it is because one figure on the cover is wearing a flannel shirt, but it fits the book surprisingly well. It's 4 people riding horses through a winding path towards a mountain, and it's fitting as the book is about a journey. I think the cover is amazingly well done, and it's one of the best covers I've seen on this show. Plus, I really like the font used for the title and author name. Let's get to the book. The book opens up with an excerpt from the Prophecies of the Linkara, and then gets to the main story. The story opens with Lewis Williamson. Not that... Well, technically that's right, so you get a pass this time. Anyway, Lewis is in the midst of being reprimanded by the principal because he and his friend Trevor were not only late to class, but running in the hallways, and were caught by the hall monitor that they refer to as the Pass Nazi. No pass for you. 1 year. They manage to not get in trouble, and Lewis heads to class. At the end of the day, he goes home, but notices a strange antique store while riding the bus. After seeing the store, he starts to hear a voice in his head commanding him to go to the store, and he decides to go check it out so the voice will shut up. He gets there and starts looking around, being drawn to a golden gauntlet that he sticks his hand into to see if it will fit. Lo and behold, it does, but when he looks up from the gauntlet, he finds that he is no longer in an antique store, and now in a dense forest. You know, that's the problem with these wrist-worn transporters. They just get set off by the smallest knock. Lewis at first believes he's dreaming and tries to wake himself up to no avail. Then he starts freaking out, but calms himself down by using the greatest mantra I've heard since just repeat to yourself, it's just a show, I should really just relax. And that mantra is, calm blue ocean. Calm blue fucking ocean. Lewis starts to rationalize and uses his knowledge of TV and movies to deduce that he's probably on another planet or in a parallel universe, and decides to go look around and find some sort of civilization. Meanwhile, Rain Vengry is haggling in a marketplace over the price of a healing powder and muses to herself about the impending attack by the darkness. And Lewis continues wandering in the forest, discovering that the gauntlet has a blade inside of it that unsheaths when he wills it to. Good thing, too, since right after discovering it, he runs into an orc. Lewis gets his ass kicked, and right before the orc kills him, he's saved by Rain. Rain heals him with the dust and brings him to her cabin in the woods. After Lewis wakes up, they do some bantering, as Lewis learns the difference between the vernacular of Earth and of the new planet he is on, which is called Sin. Rain reveals that she is a priestess of the Linkaran faith, and after Lewis falls asleep, she writes a letter to her superiors, telling them that she believes that due to Lewis's appearance and the gauntlet, she believes him to be the Linkara, the prophesized hero of their religion. They say that he'll carry a magical weapon that was bought at an unknown location. Rain helps Lewis get back on his feet and explains the Linkaran prophecy to him. That the prophecy states that a boy of 14 kiros, which are the word for years on Sin, wearing strange clothing will show up and save the world. The fact that Lewis is clueless leads Rain to be unsure that Lewis actually is the Linkara, and Lewis says that based on the available info, he believes that it's very possible for him to be the Linkara. He asks what exactly he's going to be saving the world from, but she says that she'll explain later. Rain takes Lewis to a festival, and she continues teaching him about Sin, explaining about the Hathog, or Silent Death, which was a plague that spread throughout Sin at one point, but has basically died out. They return to Rain's cabin and go to sleep. Lewis is awoken suddenly in the morning when 3 dark knights attack the cabin looking for the Linkara. They kill Rain, and Lewis, in blind rage, rushes out to confront them. Rain managed to take one of them out, and Lewis takes out one by landing on him and stabbing him with the blade. The last knight, however, Lewis has to take out in an unorthodox way. He kicks him in the crotch. Well, he kicks him in the crotch and then stabs him. Lewis wins and then goes to check on Rain, but she doesn't have a pulse, and Lewis starts to mourn for his only friend on Sin. Lewis decides that he's going to have to find his own way around, and starts trying to find his way back to the town that Rain brought him to, but he doesn't quite remember which way that was. After 5 days of wandering, Lewis collapses out of exhaustion, malnutrition, and dehydration, musing to himself how sad it is that his journey ended before it began. Before he falls unconscious, though, he sees a pair of female feet and then falls unconscious. He wakes up later and looks around the room he's in before he's greeted by a teenage girl with a face tattoo, cat ears, and a tail. Lewis hopes that he ended up in a monastery of stripping cat girls, and the girl, Indau, calls him my lord, since she knows that he's the Linkara as well, and she goes to retrieve her father Garrick, a priest of the Church of the Linkara. Garrick explains that they got a letter from Rain and went looking for him, but found Rain's grave and her cottage ransacked, so they thought that Lewis was taken by the darkness. But then he was found near their church, so they're quite happy. Lewis asks about the cat ears and tails, and they explain that they are Nako, half human and half ko, which is the Sin equivalent of house cats. Wait, they're half human, half house cat. That is wrong on so many levels. Anyway, Lewis asks what comes next, and they decide to take him to the king of the land they're in, called I. Lewis isn't sure about it, but there's a bigger problem at hand. The Dark Knights have followed Lewis to the church, and Garrick wants them to hide. But Lewis isn't having any of that, because last time he hid, Rain died, so he goes to take out the Knights head on. Lewis takes out the lead knight's companions with the crock shot trick from before, and the lead knight is taken down by one of the priestesses when she knocks him in the head with a pole. They tie him to a chair, and Lewis interrogates him, learning that he was sent by the King of I. Lewis wants to know more about the Linkaran religion, and so Garrick and Indau bring Lewis to the chamber that they keep the Linkaran scroll in. In order for them to pass into the room, they have to undergo a test in which they have the life giver, which is water, poured onto them. And if it stays clear, they're pure. If it turns black, they're not. They're all pure, and they go in, with Garrick revealing to Lewis that they only have one part of the scroll, and they'll have to go to the other churches to get the entire story. And the church where the second part of the scroll is just so happens to be in Walls, which is where the King of I resides. Garrick sends Lewis and Indau off, heading for Walls, but partway through their journey, Lewis falls ill with the Hathog. Indau is shocked that the disease still exists, but Lewis explains that because he's from another world, he isn't immune to it like all the people of Sin are. Unfortunately, like the nickname suggests, it's the Silent Death, and so Lewis isn't expected to survive very long while afflicted with it. Indau leaves Lewis to find help and discovers an inn not too far from where they're stopped and goes to get help. The inn turns out to be an inn and tavern with a bit of a strip club mixed in, and Indau goes to the bartender and asks for help. She explains her problem, and the bartender says that they'll discuss repayment later. When they get back to Lewis, they find two orcs closing in on him and take them out, retrieving Lewis and bringing him back to the inn. While moving him in, a thief named Lithmanar tries to steal the gauntlet, but it shocks him and Indau immediately takes a dislike to him. After getting Lewis to a room, the bartender pulls Indau aside to talk about repayment, which turns out to be... Later, healers try to help Lewis, but his prognosis is not good, since his unique physiology makes him incompatible with all the cures that Sin has. Indau wonders if he is truly the Linkara, and how it would be possible that the world's savior would be taken down by a nearly extinct disease. But then, the Dark Knights show up again. Man, the Dark Knights are worse than the friggin' Kazon. They just keep showing up. Indau notices how strange it is that so many Dark Knights are an eye, and the leader of the Knights, a woman named Mira, brags about how she killed a man and stole his potions, including a healing potion that can apparently heal any ailment, even the Silent Death. Indau plots to steal the potion and waits until Mira is asleep and sneaks into her room and finds her bag and pulls out a potion kept separate from the others. But when she turns around, she gets a sword pressed to her throat. Mira asks why she would risk death for a healing potion, and Indau shows her Lewis as he lays slowly dying in bed. Mira agrees to give her the potion with the stipulation that Indau will owe the darkness a favor in the future, and in exchange for... Seriously? Twice in less than 10 pages? I mean, I don't mind sex scenes, but 2 in less than 10 pages seems excessive. They give Lewis the potion and then retire to Mira's chamber to do the deed. Later, Lewis wakes up and goes looking for Indau, walking into Mira's room and seeing them doing the deed, and so he does the logical thing and walks back to his room and goes to sleep. The next morning, Mira is gone, and Indau goes to see Lewis and finds him alive and well. She's excited, but quickly finds herself trying to explain herself when Lewis asks about what she was doing the night before with Mira. She explains that it was the only way to save him, and he understands, but says that he didn't expect her to swing that way, and she explains that she has a strong heart for both men and women. Wow. A bisexual character in a fantasy book. Not something you see very often. When a 15-year-old does better representation than you are doing something wrong. Good on you, Lewis. Anyway, they set off toward walls, and halfway through their journey, Lewis stops them because they're being followed by that thief from before in Lithmanar. Indau tells Lewis that he tried to steal the gauntlet, and Lewis asks why he's following them. He figured that Lewis was the Linkara, and figured that if he stuck around by him, that he'd be sure to make a profit. So I guess Lithmanar is the guy who wrote the Ferengi Rules of Acquisition. Lewis agrees to let him tag along, because one should always have a thief in their party. They make it to the second church, and are greeted very happily by that church's priest, Danlor. They tell Danlor their concerns about the king, and Danlor tells them that the king has been acting weird lately. Before figuring out what to do with the king, Lewis wants to see the scroll, and Danlor shows it to him, with the scroll revealing that eventually Lewis's gauntlet will become a full set of golden armor, which Lewis is excited about. Lewis decides that it's time to go after the king, and they go to meet with him. Meanwhile, Indau struggles with some conflicting feelings, as since she's a priestess, she has to be pure, but her activities at the inn were anything but. The trio, plus Danlor, go to the castle, and Lewis demands a meeting with the king using some colorful metaphors, and the king lets them in. Lewis tells the king that he's the Linkara and demands that he explains his actions with the Dark Knights, but the king is not a follower of that religion and so refuses to talk, and decides that if Lewis wants to be taken seriously by the king, that he has to take down the Champion of Eye. Lewis agrees and goes to take on the Champion while Indau goes looking for the Dark Knights. Indau overhears conspiring and puts a vial of Life Giver up to the door, and it turns black, allowing her to know that the Dark Knights are definitely behind it, but she's immediately grabbed from behind. Lewis continues fighting, and as he's about to lose, a second gauntlet appears on his other hand, giving him the advantage, and he takes out the Champion. The guy who grabbed Indau turns out to be one of the King's Knights, and then he and a group of other knights burst into the room and take out all the Dark Knights. The King enacts honorable combat, where the adversary takes on the King directly, and Lewis and the King get into a fight, but Lewis only uses the gauntlets and not the blades, and fights defensively. Danlor is impatient and wonders why Lewis isn't using the blades, since that would end the fight faster, and Lithmanar asks when the last time Danlor had a Life Giver test was. Suddenly, Indau bursts in and shouts that the king isn't the one in league with the darkness, and Lithmanar shouts that it's Danlor, as he pieced it together when he realized that Danlor is next in line for the throne if the king dies, and has motive to frame the king. Indau explains that the king was allowing the Dark Knights into Eye, but only so he could get them all in one place so that they could be destroyed in one fell swoop, and that Danlor was working for the darkness so he could let the darkness devastate the land. Lewis realizes that their defensive plan isn't working, and decides that he's going to raise an army and take on the darkness head on. Lewis takes a week to prep for attacking the darkness, but in that time, the Dark Knights have started to move in on their defensive lines. Indau and Lithmanar get into another argument over the Linkaran religion, and Lewis breaks them up, getting them ready to head out on their mission. As they ride towards the darkness, Lithmanar notices that they're being watched, and tells them to jump off their horses, right when said horses are hit with fireballs. They try to fight back, but Indau's magic is no match for the Dark Knights, and they cast a spell that knocks them all unconscious. Lewis wakes up, tied together with Lithmanar and Indau, and overhears the Dark Knights and Sorcerers talk about their plan, which is to bring Lewis to their leader and kill Indau and Lithmanar. That worries Lewis, so he plans to use an escape pod and a box of hamdingers to send them home. Actually, he waits until they get close and then starts to attack them while tied up. The knights start to attack, but are soon attacked by an unknown assailant, and Lewis manages to break free, with his gauntlets once again granting him new armor, giving him golden boots that he uses to kick the crap out of the remaining knights with. Indau and Lithmanar awake and take out the last dark sorcerer, and a woman in white armor hops down from a tree, her being the unknown assailant from before. Indau recognizes her and prepares a spell. The woman is White Raven, a former Dark Knight who was exiled from the Order for Smiling, and is attempting to make up for her actions in the past and redeem herself. Indau is distrustful, but Lewis is okay with letting her join the party, as she's an asset to have on their side against the darkness. Raven has a bit of a meltdown since Lewis is very nice and cordial to her despite her past as a murderer, and Lewis slaps her and tells her to get herself together. That was just the push she needed, and she calms down and decides to join them. The next day, the party finds another inn to stay at since everyone except Lewis is tired of sleeping outside. However, they don't have any money, so Indau goes into arranged payment, getting them VIP treatment in exchange for her performing as a dancer for the bar. Raven also has some issues as she meditates, with a voice telling her to kill the Linkara, and Lewis goes off to explore the inn, seeing Indau's show. The men watching are pretty unruly, and Lewis can't stand by and have his friend be abused like that, so he jumps in to save her, and Indau begs for forgiveness and apologizes for being impure. Lewis obviously doesn't care, since he's a pretty progressive savior, and they decide to head out before the owner gets wind of Lewis's attacking of the patrons. They start to head out, but Raven has a breakdown again, and begins to attack Lewis, with Lithmanar taking her out with some knockout powder. Indau says that she's most likely suffering from Zekstrip disease, which is the sin equivalent of PTSD and schizophrenia put together. Indau says that there's a cure, but that she'll commit suicide within hours and wants to leave her behind. But Lewis says that they're going to cure her. The cure involves using a spell to enter her mind, sort of what the Doctor did in Shroud of Sorrow, and Indau sends Lewis and Lithmanar inside Raven's head. Her mind's physical manifestation is a corridor, and they start down the hallway trying to find Raven's manifestation, and they get attacked by a golden dragon. Now, personally, in this situation, I'd play Dark Magician in attack mode, but Lewis decides to use Mirror Force to reflect the dragon's fire back at him. Lewis realizes how much power he has to manipulate and uses the power to go find Raven, who is being attacked by the manifestation of Blood Raven, the part of her still loyal to the darkness. Lewis decides to attack the only way he knows how, by using his knowledge of TV and movies, and transforms himself into Ash Williams by giving himself a chainsaw and sawed-off shotgun. He takes her out, but she transforms into a blob-like entity that starts assimilating Lithmanar, which gives Lewis an ingenious idea. He figures that if he transformed himself into something that would destroy her if she assimilated it, he could beat her, and so he transforms himself into Gur from Invader Zim, which she easily absorbs, and then she starts shouting Gur quotes until she's destroyed from the inside out. He defeated her by turning into Gur. No joke, when I first read that, I had to put the book down and go rethink my life for a minute. They won, but back in the real world, Indau is surrounded by Dark Knights, and they tell Lewis to surrender or die. The armor grants him more power, and he gets golden chest armor, and starts to fight the Knights. However, they get their asses kicked. The Dark Knights don't want to drag Lewis all the way back to their master, so they plan to kill him and say that he was killed in battle. However, right before that happens, a group of archers come out of the forest and dispatch the Dark Knights pretty quickly. The leader of the archers goes up to Lewis and asks if he's a Linkara, and when Lewis responds affirmatively, he says that he is General Javak of the 3rd Eye Division, an army of people who pledged their life to ridding sin of the darkness. There's a problem, though. Dark Knights are getting through the border, and of course that means that there are more people like Danlor who are helping the darkness. They decide to give all the troops a life-giver test, and all goes well, except for one knight recognizing Lithmanar, but Lithmanar dodges questions, and they're interrupted with news that other divisions have gotten their asses kicked by the Dark Knights, and that if the Knights show up at their camp, they're done for. The leader wants to retreat, but Lewis wants to use strategy to hold off the Dark Knights until reinforcements arrive. But how are they going to hold off the Dark Knights? By using a mirror spell to make it seem like their army is bigger than it really is. While they fight, Lithmanar starts to reminisce on his past, but is stopped when White Raven grabs him, and they follow the slaves and servants that are stalking around looking suspicious. Lewis has fun fighting while the spell is in effect, and Indau commands the army in attacking with archers and catapults. Lithmanar and Raven go investigating and find a hidden cave that the Dark Knights have been using to get into Eye, with the help of slaves whose families were taken hostage, which means that there isn't a spy like the general had feared. The Dark Knights decide to dispatch the slaves that are no longer needed, and Lithmanar won't let that happen and jumps in to rescue the slaves, along with Raven. The mirror spell wears off, and the 3rd Division starts assessing the damages, while Raven and Lithmanar try to take down the Dark Knights. The Dark Knight knocks Raven unconscious and almost kills Lithmanar until he tries a trick he learned from Lewis, the croc shot. Lewis is trying to figure out what the next plan of attack is, and Indow tells him that they might need to use their backup plan, which is going to require a crap ton of magical energy. Lewis is against using it, but then the Dark Knights start catapulting stuff at them, and Lewis decides that they have to use the plan. And he has an idea on how to stall for time so they can set it up. The Dark Knights start to storm the base, but all the slaves and servants are standing in their way, armed with crossbows, swords, and other assorted weapons. The Dark Knights think they have the upper hand, but the servants start firing and the Dark Knights start falling, because the servants are motivated by the promise of being freed from bondage, which usually gets people motivated to fight for your cause. However, they can't stand the battle for long, but right when all seems grim, the backup plan works. The backup plan was for all the magic users in the area to create a giant teleportation vortex in order to move troops from far away to their area. The battle goes well, and Lewis is patched up, being reunited with Raven and Lithmanar, who are a little worse for wear, but are still good to go. Lewis tells Lithmanar to prepare for travel because they're headed for Lair, the capital of Unare, and then on to the Slad Delta, which is where the darkness is based. Lewis and crew leave the 3rd Division and don't have a lot of issues getting to Lair, only running into one lone Dark Knight who was a runaway from the fight with the 3rd Division. Lewis goes to a war memorial and locates the specific name on the list, Oro Vendry, Rain's brother, and apologizes to him for Rain's death, which happened because she was protecting him. He contemplates the issues he has with being Sin's version of Jesus, but there are bigger fish to fry. Garrick has found out about Indow's indiscretions and promptly smacks her and banishes her from the church along with disowning her. And you thought Dr. Wales from that Quantum Leap book was a crappy father. At least he didn't physically abuse Lisa. However, Lewis uses his position as the Linkara to put Garrick in his place and not allow him to use religion to vilify his daughter. Lewis says that they're allowed to not agree with what she did on a personal level, but as her indiscretions ultimately saved Lewis from the silent death, what she did was okay because it saved countless lives. After calming down, Garrick explains what he's been up to since Indow and Lewis left. He was massing the entire Linkaran church for war. He also deciphered the 3rd scroll and explains how the prophecy for the battle between Lewis and the Darkness is going to go. Long story short, it won't be easy. Fire and death will rain down from the sky, a disaster of biblical proportions. Horses with 5 heads, snakes stabbing kings.
Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
But before that, they've been invited to dinner at the king's castle, and Lewis hopes that it will be a better experience than the last king they met. They have a nice dinner, and Lithmanar starts regaling how he found out about Danlor's betrayal, and Lewis and Indow have a nice talk, with her thanking him for putting Garrick in his place and gives him a present, a book about the history of sin. Lewis promises that he won't let the darkness hurt her or anyone else, and they're about to kiss, but then the sky turns bright red and begins to set on fire, right before it starts raining a red liquid. Lewis and crew begin to leave, being accompanied by the champion of Unare, and plan to head to Jalad.
Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra.
Not that one. The champion tells Lewis a bit about Jalad, which was essentially taken over by the darkness long ago and doesn't have a very powerful army. The capital was destroyed and the royal family executed, so the remaining cities became city-states that governed themselves. However, once the darkness is gone, they're going to regain their central government with an elected leader. Lewis exposits about his religious beliefs and tells them about Jesus and such, and the champion talks about his religion, one based on a religious leader whose entire thing was that one day the people of Sin would travel throughout the stars, something that Lewis thinks is intriguing. Just then, a Dark Knight rides up to them on a black horse. They start to fight, but they all stop when the knight reveals her identity. It's Mira, the Dark Knight that Indow entertained. She reveals that she had bragged about betting a Linkaran priestess, and so the darkness promoted her to be one of his 5 horsemen of the Armageddon, which is what the prophecy was talking about with a 5-headed horse. She reveals that the other 4 horsemen and herself were sent to kill all the kings so that the darkness could take over easier, but she made a pit stop to check in on Indau, who she kidnaps and rides away with, as she kills the group's horses so they can't follow her. Everyone else figures that it's too late for Indau, and Lewis refuses to believe that and decides that he'll go after her himself if that's what it takes to keep his promise. Mira, meanwhile, has taken Indau along for her quest to kill the King of Ai, and tortures her along the way because evil. Lewis tries to catch up to her, but of course Mira is too fast for them, and they keep arriving too late. Meanwhile, Mira explains to Indau the darkness's motivations, which is that the darkness is right and everyone else is wrong. Lewis and crew find Indau's clothes that had been abandoned, and keep searching, while Mira tortures Indau to admit the one thing that she can never admit. Her secret. That she's in love with Lewis. Wait, that was a secret? Well, it was something that she hadn't fully admitted to herself, and Mira promises that if she betrays Lewis, the darkness can make him love her back, despite the fact that he already does, which is pretty evident when Lewis bursts into the cave to save Indau. He goes after Mira, but she manages to beat a hasty retreat, as Lithmanar and Raven help Indau up and get her to safety. They make it to Kook, the de facto capital of Jalad, and get Indau medical treatment, and also learn from Garrick that the horsemen have been succeeding in their plans to murder the kings. Lithmanar starts questioning how they're going to defeat the darkness, because all the prophecies just say it'll happen, but not how they can do it, and Lewis tells him that whatever happens, he's taking the darkness down. They start heading for the Slad Delta, and it seems that the darkness is prepping for battle too, because they don't run into that many dark nights on the way there. When they get to Soya, the actual capital of Jalad, which was devastated by the darkness centuries ago, they expect to see a ruined city, but find a pretty decent city that's clean and no worse for wear. The king reveals that 300 years ago, the darkness bullied them into a non-aggression pact and conscripted their soldiers, but in return, the inhabitants of Soya were granted immortality. However, Raven tells them that during her time with the darkness, she had traveled through Soya, and it was destroyed back then. Plus, no one buys the immortality story because it's just too neat and clean, and not in character for the darkness to do. After compiling a few more facts, along with Indau revealing that her bottle of life giver that she uses to check for agents of darkness exploded when they entered the city, Lewis realizes the horrible truth.
It's a trap!
They try to make a break for it, but are confronted by 3 groups of soldiers: Dark Knights, zombies, and skeletons. So is this the skeleton war that Tumblr was talking about? They start to fight back, and Lewis demands to be taken to the darkness, but a man walks up to them and tells him that that's not necessary. Yep, the darkness has finally shown up, taking on a physical form in order to meet with Lewis. The darkness tries to justify itself, saying that it's trying to do good for the world, but Lewis has no interest in talking and goes to attack, getting knocked backwards, and so he initiates Plan B. Run like hell. Lewis's armor grants him a helmet, and the darkness grabs Indau and retreats back to the castle, telling Lewis that if he wants to see her again, he should get his strength back and follow him to the castle. You know, I bet he's gonna put her in a cage with Robin and Princess Peach. Lewis wants to go and try to take them all again, despite Raven and the others telling him that they should wait until they can get an army together. Lewis refuses to listen to anything until Garrick tells him that the final part of the prophecy says that the Linkara will forfeit his life to save Sin. Lithmanar doesn't want him to go, but Lewis says that if it was prophesized, he's got to do it. He goes in, and the darkness tells him that he knows all about Lewis's journey, since the darkness and the knights share a consciousness. Lewis grabs Indau and starts to run, but Indau stabs him, because she wants his love, which the darkness promised if she gave Lewis to him, and the darkness enters his mind. Lewis's mindscape is much more interesting than a hallway. His is the bridge of a Defiant-class starship. Personally, I'd want my mindscape to be a TARDIS console room, but knowing me, I think it would probably just end up being a copy of this room. Lewis asks what the darkness's game is, and he says that he wants to convince Lewis to join his cause. Lewis asks how he plans to do that, and he brings them to another area of Lewis's mind, a Yu-Gi-Oh! Arena. They duel for a bit, and then Lewis moves them into the Council of Elrond from Lord of the Rings, and explains that good will always band together to banish evil. And then the darkness brings them into Washu's lab from Tenchi Muyo, and the darkness explains that despite advancement in tech, war will never end because of emotions, and that they should be purged. Lewis then brings them to a bored cube in order to show what a species without emotion turns into, but the darkness is just impressed by it. Then he brings them to the strangest place of all, the apartment from Friends. Of course! The ultimate evil in the world is Ross Geller. It's so simple now! The darkness tries to explain that his way is the only way because the world has had years to evolve and change, and yet it stays the same. Then the darkness brings them to the cabin where it all began in Evil Dead, and asks Lewis to join him, and Lewis nearly does, before shoving a chainsaw in the darkness's arm and putting a boomstick in its face. Lewis wakes up and starts to take out the darkness and his royal guard, before grabbing Indau and escaping for real, while she apologizes for her behavior. Lithmanar, Raven, and Garrick show up and help them escape, and Lewis runs to meet his destiny, with the final part of his armor appearing. 2 golden wings, which he uses to fly towards the darkness, who has taken on a much stronger form. Indau wants to help, and so the group teams up to send Lewis energy using a spell and give him a power boost. Lewis rushes against the darkness and has a big damn hero moment, and Lewis rams into the darkness and destroys it. But Lewis disappears, with Garrick promising to build a memorial, and Lithmanar saying that they'll never forget him. Lewis wakes up in a desert, and essentially relives the end of Evil Dead 2, with him destroying a dragon and finding out that he saved a group of knights from the Terrafell Arbiters, a group mentioned throughout the story as an evil group that existed centuries ago and did many evil things. Lewis, of course, realizes the parallel to Evil Dead 2, since he's genre savvy, and the story ends with a promise that it will be continued. And that was Angel Armor, Just a Boy. Is it good? Yeah, I think so. Sure, it's not perfect, but I have read way worse. I mean, look at it like this. This book makes references to a bunch of stuff that I like, but I at no point wanted to put this book down and go watch whatever it is that they're referencing. I mean, Before Dishonor is a travesty and a disgrace to literature made by a notable author. This was self-published and written by a first-time author, and it is way better than anything I wrote when I was 15. Sure, at times the book is silly and sometimes a little uncomfortable, but it's an overall good read. I certainly don't regret reading it. It's not the best book ever made, but it's sure as hell not the worst. Before Dishonor is the worst. Backwards is the worst. The Scarlet Letter. Don't even get me started on that one. This book, it's a relatively enjoyable, if a bit silly and unpolished fantasy novel. I know that Lewis's writing gets better, and if you want proof, go watch any of his storylines. Although right now the best example of his writing is the Atop the Fourth Wall movie. I know Lewis probably doesn't want me to say this, but I highly recommend this book to anyone that likes fantasy, and to anyone that likes Linkara and wants to see just how truly amazing his writing is right now by seeing where he started. Lewis, thank you for an overall enjoyable book, and while I haven't read the other ones, I hope I do someday because I want to see how the story continues. And thank all of you for watching the show for these past 100 episodes. I can't wait to do the next 100. If I may take a moment to break character, doing this show is one of my favorite things to do, and I never want to stop. I mean, back when I made that first video, I had no idea that I would get to 50, let alone 100 episodes. And I don't regret a moment of it.
Well, looks like I'm gonna have to stop you.
Except that one. I do regret that one. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of the Literary Lair, you can hit that subscribe button. And if you have any comments or complaints about the video, you can put those in the comments section below. And if you enjoyed this video, show it to your friends and share it around the internet. And maybe consider supporting the show on Patreon. See you next time.